Yeah. Okay. So about the meeting, Xi and Biden.
Yeah.
So far, what is your impression? I can just tell you, in China, not many people believe something would come out of it because we have been here before. Biden promised a whole lot of things, and then he would turn around do something else. Do you think it's going to be same old, or do you see any sign that would be different this time? What is your
No,
impression
I,
so far?
no, I don't think it's going to be different this time in terms of the substance of what's going to come out, except that there is going to be one important difference, which is that when Biden became president, I think the Chinese presidency, but other Chinese people, the Chinese government, were saying to themselves, well, we've had this difficult relationship with Donald Trump. Biden is this experienced foreign policy person. He's with the Democrats. The Democrats have historically been, more willing to work with us than, Trump has been. So maybe this is a good opportunity to get this relationship between the United States and China back on track. And I think initially the Chinese government was trying to build that relationship with Biden. They quickly discovered that in substance, the relationship with Biden, the administration, is no different. I mean, the policies of the administration are no different in substance from Trump's policies, except in some ways that they're even worse. And there was this terrible comment that Xi Jinping presidency made to Biden, which I'm getting now from the Chinese Foreign Ministry readout, in which, in one of their meetings, Xi said to Biden, "Look, we come, we meet, you tell me things about the specific issue of Taiwan, and then your administration does things that are completely contrary to what you've told me." Now, that is a terrible thing. When that is actually there in a discussion between world leaders, what the world leader is telling the other is, look, I don't really trust you because you come along, you're telling me all of these things, but your administration, which you supposedly head, is doing the opposite. So that can only mean one of two things. Either you don't control your administration, in which case, why am I wasting my time meeting you? Or, which is worse still, you're lying to me. Now, that is, as I say, a complete very, very that means that from this point on, the relationship is very difficult. Now, the Chinese have worked very hard, nonetheless, to keep some kind of a dialogue going, because I think that is the nature of Chinese policy. The Americans made a whole series of disastrous steps at the start of this year. The ludicrous balloon incident being one. President Biden's incredible comments about presidency, which I'm not going to repeat because, well, I don't think I need to.
Mhm.
Public comments about presidency. And the Chinese said, well, look, we can't talk with these people anymore. We've got to give a clear signal that this is unacceptable language, even though we do understand that a dialogue, some kind of dialogue with the Americans is essential. So for a while, the Chinese said, we have a freeze. The Americans began to get really worried, and they sent Blinken and Yellen and all of these other people to Beijing. They did everything they possibly could to try and get some kind of dialogue with China restarted. They finally managed to persuade Xi Jinping to come to this meeting in San Francisco. They pulled out the stops, the Americans pulled out the stops to make this meeting go, at least the appearance of this meeting, that it go well. So they agreed to everything that the Chinese said. The Chinese wanted the meeting before the APEC summit started. They got it before the APEC summit started. They wanted, the streets of San Francisco to be cleaned up. They were cleaned up. They wanted people to come out with Chinese flags, allowed people to come out with Chinese flags. San Francisco, as much better than me, has a big and very old Chinese community. So people are there out there with the Chinese flags. Things which, by the way, some people in the United States are finding humiliating. If you go to Zero Hedge or the dark regions of the American media that I sometimes have to read, you will find some people are unhappy about all of this. You have the meeting, you see the body language between the two leaders, and they look tense. They're not really smiling. One doesn't get the sense that they're really pleased to see each other. Biden, one almost gets the sense, is having to be nursed through the meeting by Blinken. I mean, Blinken is there sitting with him. There's this awful picture of him, with this sort of awful smile, which looks, frankly, very vacant smile. And what you get is not so much a meeting where any of the substantial issues are addressed, because I don't think the Chinese any longer believe that a meeting discussing substantial issues is going to achieve anything, but at least a meeting re-establishing some level of dialogue between China and the United States. And given how powerful these two countries are, I mean, they're the most powerful countries in the world by far. That is an important fact in itself, that the Chinese and the Americans are able to speak to each other at last is a good thing. But you can see from the pictures that where the balance of power has shifted. It's the Americans who had to plead with Xi Jinping to come. And it's the Americans who had to do all of these things, clean up the streets of San Francisco, have the meeting in this place, before the summit, all of those things, in order to accommodate the Chinese. And that is important in itself.
Yeah, and it's the interesting thing about this meeting is that on the one hand, they really want to have this meeting, right? But in the meantime, they also continue in the middle of the Gaza crisis, right? That when Wang Yi was helping Blinken, when Blinken went to Saudi and the MBS didn't want to meet him, and he called Wang Yi, and Wang Yi called the Saudi foreign minister, to help him out. And 2 days later, they come out with new round of sanctions. And and then the latest, of course, is Biden asked the Congress for $106 billion. So part of that will go to Taiwan to buy more weapons. So they are continuing this kind of like poking China on the eye, these kind of activities. I just don't see, and then you see Yellen was in the airport to greet Xi Jinping. So clearly she want it. I mean, to me, it's a little bit unusual, that she's there. So clear to me, or the Chinese media saying that they really want China to buy some treasury bonds. And then also the Chinese media saying the other thing is on the agenda that Biden want to convince China to buy some Boeing airplanes. That's another thing that is floating. Okay. So they definitely want China to spend some money, okay, somewhere in the US. And yet they are not showing something with their actions. I don't see any actions, any sincerity, right? So,
well, it is actually much worse than you say, because if we go back to Taiwan, which is, of course, the core issue, I mean, it's the single issue that more than any other single issue is the one that is the flashpoint. And to be very clear, there are people in the US government who know exactly how important Taiwan is for China, for the whole relationship. So the fact that this is happening is significant in itself. But this $106 million for Taiwan, $80 million apparently for the Taiwanese military to buy equipment for its army. There's a report in the BBC, which is not anything other than the most mainstream media, which has been discussing things with Taiwanese officials and also some American officials, apparently. And it seems that Taiwanese have been told that this $80 million is just the start, and that the Americans understand now that Taiwan's Air Force and Navy is going to be completely outmatched by China's. So there's nothing that can be done about that, but that they want to build up Taiwan's army. and that the ultimate intention is not to supply Taiwan with $80 million of weapons for its army, but with $10 billion of weapons for its army. So that is the plan. Now, all of this going on, exactly as you said, whilst Xi Jinping is on his way to China. So it's exactly as you said, these Americans, we have this expression in England, you want to have both your cake and to eat it as well. That is what the Americans do. By the way, that is what the Americans always want to do with every relationship. They want everybody to, come along, help the Americans whenever they need help, give the Americans whatever they like and whatever the Americans want or feel they need, whilst at the same time tolerating it when the Americans do horrible things to them. That is, as I said, it's standard American policy. I don't think the Americans can think actually in any other way. Now, the Chinese must understand this, and they must also understand that within the US government, there are different sections. So, Yellen represents the people who run the economy. They understand how absolutely crucial the relationship with China is. There are the business people. There are people like Governor Newsom of California, who presumably also want a strong relationship. They will also know that there are these other people on the foreign policy side who want to make this relationship with China confrontational and want to take advantage. And I think what China is saying is, look, let's at least talk to those people who do want a stable relationship with us, because we don't want war in the Pacific. We don't want a collapse in the economic relationship. It doesn't benefit us. It certainly doesn't benefit the rest of the world. So let's at least talk with these people, at least for the moment, and see whether we can keep things going, at least for a while. But even as we're doing that, we can see the other side of what the United States is doing. And therefore, we will forge our own relationships with countries friendly to ourselves. We will build up the Chinese armed forces. We will take steps to insulate our economy from American sanctions. We will redevelop our economy in our own way. And that's what I think President Xi was doing in San Francisco. I think the Chinese understand that very well. I think the important thing to understand is that this year, in spite of all of this, in spite of all of these events by the United States, the President Xi went to Washington, to San Francisco, in a strong position. China has just produced this super chip in incredible speed. Now, this was completely unexpected and profoundly shocking in the United States. Now, again, we talk in the West about the Sputnik moment. The Sputnik moment was when the Soviet Union launched the first artificial satellite in 1957, and it was a tremendous shock. The Americans couldn't believe that the Russians were that advanced. This is analogous to that. It is on that scale. It's not being talked about as openly because the political system is not as open as it was in the 50s in the United States. But it was a tremendous shock. It showed to the US the limits of its technological lead over China and of its power over China. We've also seen, and this is not to be discounted either, the failure of the Ukrainian offensive in the summer, which again, the Americans were expecting or hoping would be successful and would leave the United States looking like a winner in a major international crisis, with perhaps China's friend Russia going through a political crisis. Well, it turned out in exactly the opposite way. So given all of this, given the fact that events generally are moving in China's direction, the level of the economy, at the level of strategic events like the Ukrainian war, in the Middle East, as we discussed, it makes sense, it seems to me, for the Chinese to resume this dialogue now, but without the illusions that perhaps existed when President Biden first became president.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, he's meeting. I mean, Xi Jinping is meeting business leaders, Yeah, and yeah, so yeah, that's how I see it.
I mean, there's no harm in trying to create a pro-Chinese lobby in the United
Yeah,
States,
yeah,
which
yeah.
is what the United States, what China is trying to do. Now,
Mm-hmm.
as I said, whether that's going to be strong enough to
Yeah.
affect things in the United States, who knows?
Mm-hmm.
But if you don't try,
Mm-hmm.
then you are giving up the game
Mm-hmm.
before the game is even played. So, why not? Why not meet business leaders? Why not meet people like Elon Musk and Bill Gates and people like that? Why not? And the chief of Apple, if he was there, I don't know who was there exactly. Why not meet, more rational American politicians like Governor Newsom? Why
Mm-hmm.
not meet people why not discuss things with the people in the finance side in the United States, Secretary Yellen, people like that, and see what you can do. But you're not going to make concessions, seriously important concessions, which might jeopardize your overall position in the belief that will, you're securing this relationship. On the contrary, you're going to take precautions in case things continue to go badly, which they probably will. And that's wisdom, if I may
Yeah.
say. And it contrasts, by the way, very, very much with the massive mistakes that the Russians made in the past, where they did at various times think that they'd come to a long-term understanding with the United States, made huge concessions to the Americans, and then found that the Americans had taken the concessions and were as hostile to them as ever.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, in general, APEC, what do you think it can be achieved there realistically? Do you expect anything?
No, is the short answer. The important meeting, the really important discussion has already taken place, which is the one between Biden and Xi Jinping. There will be important moves in the Pacific region between various countries, but they will be conducted bilaterally. And of course, various Pacific countries have important relationships now with each other. But if you're talking about the stance of, say, the ASEAN states, they will resolve that bilaterally, either with Washington or Beijing. And speaking of the ASEAN states, it's important to say, just coming back to the ASEAN states, that over the Gaza crisis, they issued very strong statements, which again mirror the Chinese position, supporting a ceasefire and things like that. So the APEC summit is important in the sense that it's always important to bring leaders together. It's always a good idea to have everybody there in the same room where they're talking to each other. The Chinese, by the way, insisted that the Russians should be there also. And there is a Russian delegation. There's a fairly small one and not very prominently led. But anyway, so they're all there. But the meeting itself, as I said, is not going to be the place where the big diplomacy is conducted. And the most important meeting has already happened.